So imagine someone just drops a massive, sprawling, like a 500-page patient file right onto your desk.
Oh, instant panic mode.
Right. And you have exactly 30 seconds before the attending physician walks into the room.
Yeah, and when she opens that door, she's going to want to know immediately what is going on with this patient.
Exactly. You obviously can't read the whole thing.
Yeah.
You can't just, skim the first sentence of every page either.
No, that won't work.
You have to somehow extract the absolute unvarnished essence of that file. And you have to do it without changing the truth of it, all in just a few breaths.
It's honestly an incredibly high-pressure scenario, but it happens every single day, in hospitals, boardrooms, command centers.
Yeah.
And the entire situation relies on this one cognitive skill that most of us just completely take for granted.
Welcome to the deep dive. Whether you're a student prepping for the TEAS or HESI nursing entrance exams, or maybe a professional just trying to dig your way out of information overload.
Which is all of us, really.
Right. Or if you're just insanely curious about how human beings process the world, today's deep dive is custom built for you.
We are looking at a really comprehensive educational text today.
We are. And our mission today is to decode the deceptively complex art of summarizing a passage. Because as the sources show us, condensing text isn't just some boring English class reading task.
Not at all.
It is a vital survival skill in a very noisy world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think most of us, myself included, carry around this childhood illusion of what a summary actually is.
Oh, totally. The old highlighter trick.
Yes. When I was in grade school, summarizing just meant grabbing a yellow highlighter, hunting for a topic sentence, and just copying it down onto a fresh piece of paper.
Right. And the crazy thing is, early 20th century reading pedagogy actually treated it exactly that way.
Really?
Yeah, the educational system viewed summarizing as a purely mechanical process. You find the bold text, you copy it, you move on.
Wow. But that's not how it works now, right? No. Modern reading comprehension frameworks, which, by the way, happen to be the exact frameworks behind those high-stakes nursing entrance exams, they paint a much more complicated picture of what our brains are actually doing.
So our source breaks down the anatomy of a true summary into three distinguishing features. First is compression. We're talking about taking a 500-word passage and shrinking it down to 2 or 3 sentences.
Huge reduction.
Huge. Second is hierarchy. That means you keep the central claims, but you have to just ruthlessly toss out the digressions. The illustrative examples, the repeated phrases.
You have to let them go.
You really do. And third, and this is probably the most difficult part, transformation.
Right.
It has to be in your own words, not just lifted verbatim from the text.
And the transformation piece is really where a summary stops being mere excerpting. You aren't just pulling a quote and pasting it into a new document.
Right.
You are actively metabolizing the information.
I have to admit, this completely challenges the way I approach studying for years. Going back to that childhood method, I used to think of summarizing like packing a suitcase.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, where you're just trying to shove your entire closet into a smaller box by folding things tighter, just cramming it in.
Right, just compressing the exact same stuff.
Exactly. But based on this 3-part definition, it's not that at all. It's more like looking at the entire closet, checking the weather forecast for your destination, and then carefully selecting only the 3 outfits that actually matter for the specific trip.
Yeah, you are leaving the rest behind on purpose.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is how cognitive psychology in the late 1970s and 1980s proved that childhood highlighting method completely inadequate.
How so?
Well, researchers stopped just assuming they knew how students read. They actually began studying how people process text in real time.
And what did they find?
They discovered something shocking. Identifying the main idea is almost never an objective reality.
Wait, really?
Yeah. You can have 2 very careful, highly educated readers look at the exact same scientific or argumentative passage and completely disagree on which point is the central one.
Why is that? Are they just reading different parts of the text?
It is because different claims within a text are constantly competing for the reader's attention. And a reader's background knowledge heavily influences what stands out to them.
Oh, that makes sense.
And this leads to a critical distinction that exam writers specifically exploit: the difference between explicit main ideas and implied main ideas.
Right, okay, let's break that down. An explicit main idea is basically handed to you on a silver platter, right?
Exactly. It is stated directly in the text. You can point to it.
But an implied main idea requires you, the reader, to infer the core message from the overall pattern of all the supporting details.
Yes. And summarizing an implied main idea is a fundamentally harder, highly interpretive task. You aren't just locating a sentence anymore.
You are building an understanding from scratch,
Right.
which honestly sounds like a massive amount of cognitive effort.
It really is.
So if summarizing requires that much heavy mental lifting and interpretation, how did we ever decide to formalize it, like to actually test people on it in the first place?
Well, it's funny you ask because it didn't just happen overnight.
Our text points out that this skill actually has two distinct historical lineages.
Yes, two very different paths.
Let's dig into the first one, the administrative lineage. This traces back to something called precise writing in British grammar schools.
Ah, the precise. It's essentially the ancestor of the modern summary.
Okay.
It is a highly structured, strict word count condensation of a text. And during the days of the British Empire, mastering it was definitely not optional.
Yeah, the source mentions it was used as an actual qualifying exercise in the Indian civil service examinations. This was following the 1854 Macaulay Report on the East India Company.
That's right.
I'm trying to picture the reality of this. You have colonial administrators stationed thousands of miles away from London,
Before the internet.
right, before instant communication.
Yeah.
They had to condense these massively long, localized reports into short, accurate briefs just to send back on ships to their superiors.
Consider the practical consequences of that environment. The superiors back in London simply did not have the time or the proximity to read the original, sprawling documents.
They relied entirely on the process.
Exactly, and a badly compressed summary, one that missed the hierarchy or failed the compression test, I mean, it could literally misrepresent a regional crisis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it could trigger the wrong military response or cause a major policy disaster.
So the stakes were life and death, essentially.
Absolutely. Because the stakes were so incredibly high, precise writing formalized these strict rules we still use today. You cut the illustrative material, you preserve the logical sequence of the argument, and you never ever add your own outside opinion.
But military and administrative precision is really only half the story here.
That's true.
If we want to understand why summarizing goes wrong, like why those TEAS and HESI exams are so tricky, we have to look at what our brains are doing behind the scenes.
Yes, the psychology side.
That brings us to the second lineage, from cognitive psychology, and this involves a rather spooky experiment from 1932.
Oh, this is one of the most famous studies in psychology. It was conducted by a British psychologist named Frederick Bartlett.
What was he looking for?
He was curious about how memory and reading intersect. So he had his participants, who are all British students, read a Native American folktale called The War of the Ghosts.
A story that would have been completely outside their cultural context at the time.
Exactly the point. The story was full of unfamiliar cultural markers, supernatural elements, and a narrative structure that just didn't follow the typical Western beginning, middle, end format.
Right.
Bartlett had them read it, and then he asked them to reproduce the story from memory.
Like immediately after.
Sometimes. Sometimes they would do it themselves over a period of weeks, and sometimes they would pass their retelling to the next person, like a giant academic game of telephone.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. As the summary shrank down to about a third of the original length, the participants didn't just passively reproduce the story with fewer words.
No, they didn't.
They actively altered it. They dropped the culturally unfamiliar elements entirely. If the original story mentioned hunting seals in canoes, the British students might summarize it as fishing in boats.
Right. They unconsciously reshaped the text to fit their own cultural expectations.
That is wild.
Bartlett actually coined a term for those expectations. He called it a schema.
A schema.
Yeah, you can think of a schema as a mental filing cabinet where you organize your understanding of how the world works.
Okay.
When the British students encountered something that didn't fit their existing filing system, their brains just quietly fixed it for them.
Wait, they didn't just delete things though, right?
Yeah.
The source notes, they would sometimes actually add details that were never in the original text at all.
Yes. They just slipped them in there to make the story fit their worldview and make it feel more logical to them.
And they did it without realizing it.
Completely unconsciously, and this proves something revolutionary for reading scientists. Summarizing is not a passive act of copying.
It's active.
It is an active, interpretative construction. When you summarize, You are not functioning like a photocopier. You are reconstructing the raw information through the highly biased lens of your own mind.
Okay, but this raises a terrifying problem for anyone taking a test or, working in a hospital.
It really does.
Knowing that human memory naturally distorts information, how do experts actually summarize accurately without altering the truth? Like, if our brains are hardwired to reconstruct things and accidentally add our own fake details to fit our schemas, how do we stop doing that?
Well, we have to rely on a conscious, structured system to override our natural instincts. In 1978, cognitive scientists Walter Kinch and Toon Van Dyke proposed that skilled readers do this by building what they called a macrostructure.
Macrostructure sounds a bit like textbook jargon, honestly. How does that actually work in practice?
Fair enough. Think of it like zooming out on a digital map.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you are zoomed all the way in, you see individual houses, trees, street signs. Those are the individual sentences and words of a text.
Right.
A macrostructure is what happens when you zoom out to see the entire city grid. You lose the granular details, but you gain the overarching shape of the neighborhood.
I see.
Skilled readers mentally build that zoomed-out grid as they read. They apply specific mental operations to the raw information to strip away the houses and reveal the grid.
And a few years later, in 1983, psychologists Anne Brown and Jean Day took that map-making concept and published a landmark study.
Yes, the macro rules.
They laid out specific macro rules for summarizing text. It's basically a toolkit for condensing text without distorting the truth.
Let's hear it.
The first part of their toolkit is all about subtraction. You just delete trivial or unnecessary material.
Makes sense.
And you delete redundant material. If the author states the same idea 3 different ways for emphasis, you only keep 1.
Now, those subtraction rules are where most novices stop.
Right.
But Brown and Day found that true expertise requires a second set of operations, which are much more complex.
This is where we get into substituting superordinate terms.
Yes.
The source gives a great practical example of this. Instead of writing out a long list like sodium, potassium, and calcium, a skilled summarizer will just substitute the broader term, electrolytes.
Exactly.
Or, instead of listing every single physical check a nurse performed, taking blood pressure, checking pupils, listening to the heart, you substitute a superordinate action and just say, the nurse assessed the patient.
Notice the difference in cognitive effort there. You aren't just crossing out words with a red pen.
No.
You are actively categorizing information. You are looking at a cluster of details, figuring out what umbrella they all live under, and then writing down the name of the umbrella.
It reminds me of making a culinary reduction in a kitchen.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, like you start with this big watery pot of stock and you let it simmer for hours.
Yeah.
You aren't just taking the water out. You are actively concentrating the flavors to create a fundamentally richer, entirely new sauce.
Yes.
A superordinate flavor, if you will.
That is a perfect way to look at it. And that generative step, that active concentration of ideas that leads to Brown and Day's final rule. Selecting or inventing a topic sentence.
Okay.
If the passage explicitly gives you one, great, select it. But if it's an implied main idea, you actually have to invent the thesis yourself. You have to write the sentence the author implied but never actually said.
And inexperienced readers struggle with this, right?
Tremendously. Inexperienced readers and young children, they tend to overuse those first 2 subtraction rules. They just delete the things that seem boring.
Just crossing things out.
Right. And as a result, their summaries just look like choppy, disjointed copies of the original text. True expert summarizing requires that generative culinary reduction work.
Which brings us to the real-world stakes of all this. This generative condensation isn't just some academic exercise to get a good grade on a reading comprehension test.
No, not at all.
In the medical field, it literally saves lives. For anyone listening to this deep dive who's preparing for a career in nursing or medicine, this is where the rubber meets the road.
The source highlights 2 highly structured forms of professional summarizing used constantly in modern healthcare.
Let's talk about the first one.
The first is the SOAP note, which stands for Subjective, Objective, Assessment, Plan.
Right. Imagine trying to capture a messy, sprawling clinical encounter. You have the rambling patient interview where they tell you about their dog and their back pain.
Plus a stack of vital signs, lab values, and medication histories.
Exactly. The SOAP note forces a clinician to compress all of that chaos into a tightly formatted summary that another clinician can read, understand, and act on in under a minute.
It is basically the modern-day equivalent of the colonial administrator's précis.
It really is. The second example of the text is the SBR handoff.
Ah,
Situation, background, assessment, recommendation. Hospitals use this constantly during shift changes and emergencies.
yes, they do.
And the origin of SBR completely blew my mind. It wasn't invented by doctors. It was adapted from the U.S. Navy, specifically nuclear submarine crews.
Which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense considering the environment of a submarine.
Right.
You have dozens of people operating highly dangerous, complex machinery in a very confined space. If an alarm goes off underwater, a junior officer cannot spend 10 minutes giving the captain a rambling backstory about a valve pressure issue.
There's no time for that.
They needed a terse, standardized way to convey critical information under intense pressure without omitting a single essential detail.
So, in the early 2000s, patient safety researchers, most notably a physician named Michael Leonard at Kaiser Permanente, they brought SBIR into the healthcare space.
And why did they do that?
Because they realized that miscommunication during patient handoffs was a leading contributor to preventable medical errors. Bad summarizing was literally hurting people.
That is so sobering.
It is. So if you are prepping for the TEAS or HESI, you really have to internalize the gravity of this. A nurse who cannot summarize a patient's status accurately using SBR can endanger a life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the central tension in all summarizing research, whether it is happening on a nuclear submarine, in a hospital ward, or just in an exam room.
What's that?
It is the constant tension between fidelity and economy.
Fidelity and economy. So how much can you cut before you distort the truth of the source?
Exactly. If you cut too much, you lose fidelity, you lose accuracy, and the captain doesn't know which valve is failing.
Right.
But if you don't cut enough, you lose economy. The summary is too long to be useful in an emergency, and the patient suffers while you are still talking. Balancing those two forces is really the hallmark of a skilled professional.
That tension between fidelity and economy is exactly what we are grappling with today, not just in hospitals, but everywhere, thanks to the rise of new technologies.
Oh, absolutely.
We are seeing that century-old Bartlett War of the Ghosts problem play out in real time with artificial intelligence.
We really are. Large language models are routinely used now to summarize articles, corporate meeting notes, and even electronic medical records.
But they run into the exact same problem Bartlett's human participants did, don't they?
Yes. When an AI encounters a gap in a text or a concept that doesn't neatly align with its training data, it sometimes inserts plausible-sounding details that were never actually in the source material.
We call them AI hallucinations.
Yeah.
But based on this text, a hallucination is really just a digital schema reconstruction.
It is the exact same mechanism. The algorithm is fixing the story to fit its statistical expectations, just like the British students changed the canoes to boats.
Wow.
But in healthcare, an AI-fabricated detail in a patient summary isn't just a quirky tech glitch. It is a massive safety hazard.
Oh, for sure.
It's why hospitals are currently having to build in manual human verification steps just to double-check the AI's summaries. The technology still struggles with fidelity.
Which brings us back to the human element, and specifically the exam room.
Yes, let's talk about exams.
Let's talk about the realities of standardized tests, like the TEAS and HESI. Have you ever noticed how the reading passages on those tests are always about the most neutral, unfamiliar, or frankly boring topics?
Definitely.
You're never reading about your favorite hobby. You're reading about, like, the migratory patterns of a specific beetle or the history of weaving in a remote village.
Test makers do that deliberately, and it connects directly back to Bartlett's schemas.
How?
Reading researchers in the 1980s proved that readers with more background knowledge on a topic will actually identify completely different main ideas than novices reading the exact same passage.
Really?
Your prior knowledge literally changes what you think the text is about.
So if the test gives you a passage about a topic you already know a lot about, you might summarize it based on the extra information already floating around in your head.
Instead of what is actually printed on the page.
Right. So by using obscure or neutral topics, the test makers neutralize your schemas.
Exactly.
They level the playing field to measure your actual summarizing skill, not your outside subject matter expertise.
Understanding that helps navigate some of the critical misconceptions that trip test takers up all the time.
So what does this all mean for exam day?
Well, the first major trap is confusing summarizing with paraphrasing.
We need to draw a hard line there.
They do.
Paraphrasing is taking a specific sentence and restating it in your own words, but keeping it at roughly the same length and level of detail. It is essentially translation.
Right.
Summarizing, on the other hand, demands that culinary reduction. It must compress. Length matters.
Then there is the first sentence myth.
Oh, I fell for this one.
Educational tools often teach students that they just need to underline the first sentence of every paragraph to find the main idea.
Research shows that is a dangerous assumption. Topic sentences are frequently buried in the middle of a paragraph to pivot an argument.
Or they are tucked at the very end as a conclusion.
Or, as we discussed with implied main ideas, they're completely absent.
Right.
That is when you have to use the Brown and Day rules to step back, look at the whole grid, and invent the topic sentence yourself based on the supporting details.
And perhaps the most dangerous trap on any standardized exam, the opinion trap.
A good summary is descriptive. It is never evaluative.
Never.
If you read a passage making an argument about climate change, and your summary says, this passage makes a weak argument because, you have just failed the summarizing task.
Yep.
You have crossed the line from summarizing into critique.
No.
You're acting like a Bartlett participant, injecting your own worldview into the text.
Could be true.
So on exam day, you have a built-in survival checklist. If you see a multiple-choice summary answer that includes a personal critique or a moral judgment, run the other way.
Definitely.
If the answer choice is the exact same length as the original passage, run the other way, because that is a paraphrase. And if it just copies a sentence verbatim from the text, it's a trap designed for people still relying on the childhood highlighting method.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. As you approach any dense text, whether it is an exam passage, a news article, or a medical file, what stands out to you about how your own biases might influence what you think a text is about?
That's a great question.
Are you reading what is actually printed on the page, or are you unconsciously filling in the blanks with your own expectations?
It requires a tremendous amount of self-awareness. Because at the end of the day, whether you are a rushed journalist trying to file a story, a tired executive staring at a 50-page report, or a nurse giving an SBR handoff at the end of a grueling 12-hour shift, the ability to look at a massive wall of text and accurately judge what actually matters is an increasingly rare superpower.
It is the only way we manage the daily flood of information without drowning in it. You have to be able to cut the trivial, keep the essential, and never distort the truth.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Frederick Bartlett proved nearly a century ago that the very acts of summarizing naturally reconstructs and overwrites our own human memories, what happens to our internal understanding of the world when we start outsourcing all of our daily summaries to artificial intelligence?
Wow.
If we let an algorithm condense our emails, our meetings, and our medical histories, do we risk losing our own cognitive ability to form the gist of our own lives?
It represents a profound shift in how we process and store reality. I mean, if we stop doing the generative work, we might stop building the macrostructures in our own minds entirely.
Something to think about the next time you are handed a giant stack of information. You don't have to read every single word, but you do have to know how to find the pulse. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep packing that suitcase carefully, watch out for your own schemas, and we'll see you next time.